few weeks ago, I heard an interview with a woman who claims to be a witch. She talked about witchcraft, and it really got my attention. It reminded me of a story my grandpa told me when I was younger. At the time, I didn't pay much attention, but after hearing that, which described how some people lose consciousness and become these horror witches, I understood better what my grandpa was trying to tell me. My grandpa lived most of his life in a small town near Sorrow. He always said there were stories the townspeople didn't tell visitors, for fear of scaring them or being judged. Back then, I didn't believe in supernatural stuff, but he insisted I should stay alert. He explained that when he was young, he had a close friend named Marta. She was always cheerful and had a great smile. They grew up together, and their families had known each other forever. Marta lost her mom when she was in her 20s. It really hit her hard. She was at her mom's deathbed, praying for her to live longer, but it didn't happen. That loss made her distrust the religion she had believed in. She stopped going to church and started saying mean things about God. She was angry that he hadn't saved her mom. At first, my grandpa didn't think much of it. He figured she needed time to heal, but he noticed that it wasn't just her beliefs that changed. Her whole personality shifted. She went from being this loving, happy young woman to being rude and distant. It didn't happen overnight. It was a slow process. She started making weird comments about feeling different energies and how regular prayers didn't work anymore. Later, her physical appearance changed too. She gained weight, looked disheveled, and seemed older than she should. Her skin had a sickly tone, and sometimes it looked like she hadn't bathed or slept. My grandpa was worried but kept visiting her, trying to stay friends. The neighbors said they hardly ever saw her. When her mom died, Marta was all alone in the house. She had no siblings or close relatives. Her house was a bit far from the town center and off the main square. One afternoon, my grandpa decided to drop by with some homemade food. He wanted to see if she needed help. When he got there, the door was ajar and it was really quiet inside. He went in carefully and saw that the living room was a mess. There were overturned chairs, leftover food on the floor, and this stale smell that gave him the creeps. It wasn't normal for Marta's house to be like that. He tried to take it all in and moved slowly towards where he thought she might be. In one of the corners, he found her standing naked. The only light came from a nearby window and a candle she was holding. The small flame lit up the corner where my grandpa was standing. He noticed strange marks on her skin, like bumps and burns. He tried to call out to her, but she didn't respond. She just stood there, motionless, with the candle lit and her gaze fixed on the wall or the candle. He couldn't tell which. Even though my grandpa tried to see her face, the position she was in and the darkness made it impossible. At that moment, he felt a weight on his chest, like someone invisible was pressing down on him. Before he could get any closer, he saw something out of the corner of his eye. It was a silhouette crossing the kitchen. He described it as a huge but extremely thin black dog with a crooked gait. It moved slowly but purposefully, like it didn't care he was there. The thing hid behind a wall, and then there was silence. My grandpa felt a chill that was hard to describe, along with an urge to get out of there. He didn't stick around any longer. He left the house without looking back and went home, still feeling scared. He spent a few days thinking about whether he should tell someone what he saw or keep quiet. He also felt guilty for not helping his friend more, but he knew he couldn't handle that kind of situation. He thought about talking to someone to organize help, but the fear of being called a gossip held him back. So he let time pass without doing anything. Later, he tried to visit her again, hoping she'd be in better shape. This time, the house was padlocked. He knocked on the door and waited, but no one came out. He asked the neighbor across the street if she knew anything. The lady, without opening the door much, said she had no idea where Marta went, but she had seen her leave towards the mountain a few days ago. She mentioned that Marta did this often and came back dirty, with wounds on her arms and clothes covered in mud. The neighbor also said they sometimes heard moans or screams coming from the nearby hill, a place almost no one went because it was so lonely. The neighbor warned my grandpa not to go looking for her because there were rumors that Marta was involved in dangerous things. People avoided her for fear something bad would happen. My grandpa was torn between wanting to help and knowing his presence might not be useful. especially if she was in a really bad mental state. Even so, he spent several afternoons watching the path that led to the mountain, hoping to see her come down and talk to her, even if it was just for a minute. One day, Marta stopped appearing altogether. No neighbor saw her again, and the door to her house stayed closed. The neighborhood was split between those who thought she died in some cave and those who believed she was out there, doing even scarier things. My grandpa was left with the mystery of where she went, feeling guilty for not insisting on helping her before things got out of control. Over time, the story faded. Many years later, when my grandpa was an old man, he told me that this experience was a lesson. He learned that not all practices are harmless. There's something very real when people get into magic without taking precautions. He warned me not to look for answers in dark corners because sometimes those corners can swallow you whole. When I heard the interview with the witch, everything took on a new meaning. The woman talked about people who start with simple spells out of curiosity or revenge and then get tied to forces that are too strong for them. She said they become witches in the scariest sense because they lose their humanity and are driven by evil impulses. I think Marta lived through that. If you're enjoying the video, please subscribe the channel for future videos, and like and share with your friends. A few months ago, I started feeling like my home life was super tense. It wasn't just my parents arguing every time money got tight. There was something else going on. I always knew my family wasn't perfect, but this was getting really strange. My uncle, who says he's some kind of shaman, had a big fight with my parents a while back. It all started over money, and things have been weird ever since. At first, I didn't want to believe he'd use witchcraft or something to hurt us. It sounded crazy, but then stuff started happening, and it was hard to ignore. One day, we found a bunch of dead flowers tied with black threads right in front of our front door. It was gross. You could tell it wasn't just some random decoration. The flowers were all wilted and sticky, like they'd been dipped in something. I got goosebumps just looking at them, but my parents brushed it off, saying someone probably left them by mistake. My dad threw them away and tried to forget about it. I could tell my mom didn't buy it, but she didn't say anything either. A few weeks passed, and things got worse. My parents were arguing more, and the whole house felt heavy. Then one afternoon, I noticed this terrible smell, like rotting meat. We couldn't figure out where it was coming from, so my dad and I decided to dig a little in the yard. We were shocked to find the body of a small dog buried there. It was wrapped in strips of cloth with symbols on them and had some weird objects next to it. It was clear this wasn't an accident. I felt sick when I saw it, but what happened next was even worse. A few days later, our dog, who had been with us for years, suddenly got really sick and died. We took him to the vet, but they couldn't figure out what happened. When I saw our dog's body, I couldn't shake the feeling that it looked a lot like the one we found buried. It hit me hard because I loved that dog. We all thought my uncle was behind it. He'd warned us a bunch of times that we wouldn't have peace. Over time, the house became a place I didn't want to be. I'd come home from school and feel this thick, heavy atmosphere. My parents were always arguing, even over the smallest things. It seemed like they couldn't go a single day without fighting. I started to think that maybe my uncle's witchcraft was real and was affecting us. It was hard to talk to anyone about it because most people wouldn't believe me. My parents suspected something too, but they acted like it was just normal, everyday problems. The scariest part was when I started waking up in the middle of the night. The first time I was paralyzed in bed. It was around 2 a.m., and I felt a blow on my shoulder, like someone was pushing me. I opened my eyes, but I didn't see anything. I tried to go back to sleep, but the next day, I had a pain in my shoulder and felt really anxious. The second time, it was over a weekend. I'd stayed up late studying and went to bed around midnight. I felt that blow on my shoulder again, so hard that I jumped out of bed. I turned on the light, thinking I'd see something, but there was nothing there. That same feeling of fear came over me. I couldn't brush it off as a nightmare anymore. The third time, I was shaking for a long time. I felt like something was in the house, watching me, and I couldn't shake it. It was hard to accept that my own family wasn't doing anything to stop it. My uncle just sat back and watched while we lived in fear. I thought about looking for help on my own, but I didn't know who to turn to. Sometimes, I'd stay in my room, trying to distract myself, but I was too scared to be alone with the lights off. The silence in the house was suffocating. There were days when I couldn't stand it because I felt like I'd hear that strange noise or feel that presence again. My parents didn't want to confront my uncle. They said they didn't have proof that he was behind all this. Even though they knew he'd promised to make our lives miserable, they let it go, either because they were afraid of a family scandal or because they thought it was just a coincidence. I didn't blame them for being confused, but this situation was wearing me down. I couldn't sleep well or function normally. I thought about leaving the house, but I didn't have the resources or the age to do it without causing more problems. I just kept hoping that my uncle would get tired of it or that my parents would finally take action. I didn't know what it would take to stop someone who practiced witchcraft, but I knew there had to be a way to protect ourselves or at least face the problem head-on. Hello, my name is Veronica. This story is all about witchcraft and a whole lot of drama. I hope it helps you. So one day, while I was waiting for my daughter to get out of school, I struck up a conversation with a lady I'd met at a few school events. Sometimes we swap stories we hear from people who work in our homes or who come from other places. That day, she told me something that, according to her, the girl who helps her with cleaning had told her. The girl is from a small town way out in the boonies, and apparently, something really unusual happened there involving a lady everyone knew as a witch. I was super intrigued because you don't hear stories like this every day. But according to my new acquaintance, it's all happened recently, and people in town are still talking about it with a lot of concern. She started by explaining that in that town, security works a little differently because there's no formal jail or police presence like in the city. Instead, there are groups of men who organize to make sure there aren't any robberies or major problems. According to the girl, the witch's son had abused a local girl. The details were hazy, but it was a really serious event that got everyone in town really upset. Someone tipped off the men in charge of security, and they caught the boy red-handed. They grabbed him and locked him up in a house they used to hold offenders since, like I said, there's no official prison in that place. When the witch found out her son was detained, she made a huge scene. She went to the safe house to demand his release. She said they didn't know who they were messing with and threatened the men with revenge. She promised them they'd pay if they didn't let her son go. The guards didn't believe her because a lot of gossip and tall tales circulate in those parts, and it's not uncommon for people to exaggerate to try to intimidate others. She kept up her threats, repeating that they had her son and that he'd get them back if they didn't release him. But they ignored her and refused to let him go. A few days later, the witch disappeared. There were rumors that some people saw her heading into the mountains, which freaked out several townsfolk. And curiously, since then, people started talking about seeing balls of fire in the mountains, strange lights that had never been seen before. According to them, these lights were seen in the distance but seemed to move in a really unpredictable way. People connected these sightings to the witch because it was just too much of a coincidence that she went to the mountains and suddenly these phenomena started happening. The story got even more disturbing when the witch returned to town after being gone for a while. They said she looked really strange. Her head was almost bald, and the little hair she had left was cut all uneven, like she'd used old scissors or whatever she could find. She walked with her head down and didn't scream like before. People noticed her fixed gaze and how she avoided eye contact with anyone. All this happened while her son was still locked up. Nobody understood what she was doing or why she'd been gone for so long. Then, suddenly, one night, word spread that her son had escaped from the safe house. The men who were watching him couldn't explain how it happened. They said they didn't find the lock forced or any signs that someone had tried to open the door from the outside. Basically, when they checked at dawn, they saw the door open and the cell empty. A big commotion started in town because everyone was afraid the boy was loose and looking to do more harm, or that his mother was planning something even worse against those who arrested him. On the other hand, the son didn't show up for a long time. It was like he'd left the area or was hiding in the mountains with the witch's help. Some said the witch had surely made some evil pact to get her son to disappear without a trace. Others preferred to think she took advantage of the dark of night, bribed someone, or just found the guards being careless. Since there was no clear evidence, The most comfortable explanation for many was that the witch resorted to something supernatural. After a while, the boy showed up again. Nobody knew where he'd been or why he chose that moment to return. But as soon as the townspeople recognized him, they organized themselves pretty quickly and caught him. What followed was a really violent act. They lynched him without giving him a chance to explain anything. In that town, they say it was a chilling event. People gathered with sticks and surrounded him, taking justice into their own hands. In the end, the witch's son ended up worse off than he would have been in the safe house. The lady who told me everything concluded by saying that back in town, they say the mother managed to free her son from jail but ended up losing him forever. According to what they say, he didn't come out of it unscathed. That's why it's said that instead of allowing the boy to return to normal, everything went wrong, and the townspeople lynched him. Nobody managed to stop that fury, and the same men who had initially arrested him didn't bother to intervene when the mob formed. Some even felt relieved that the problem was resolved once and for all.